Welcome to FACT's webinar called Setting the Course, Making a Living Doing What You Love. Our presenter today is Annie Warmke. This webinar is hosted by Food Animal Concerns Trust. I am Larissa McKenna, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating today's session. Thank you for joining us. To begin with just a few quick introductions, FACT is a national nonprofit organization. We are headquartered in Illinois, and we promote the safe and humane production of meat, milk, and eggs. I direct FACT's Humane Farming Program, which provides a number of opportunities for livestock and poultry farmers. And this webinar is part of our Humane Farming webinar series. I encourage you to please visit our website to learn more about all of our farmer services. So at this point in time, I'm very pleased to introduce our presenter, Annie Warmke. Annie is a social entrepreneur and serves as a mentor in FACT's Humane Farming Mentorship Program. She's passionate about growing businesses that not only sustain the owners, but also benefit the employees and the community. Annie has successfully started several nonprofits, women's funds, and her own small business, Blue Rock Station, a sustainable living farm center that features an earthship, 14 buildings made out of clean garbage, a goat herd, and workshops that feature topics such as goat college and solar installation. To learn more or to listen to podcasts and webinars about her work, you can visit bluerockstation.com. So we are incredibly lucky to have her with us today. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Annie so that she may begin her presentation. Annie, please take it away.
Okay, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can, Annie. You sound good.
Okay. We've had so many technical problems. I was like, when you didn't answer, it's like, oh no. Anyway, hello to everybody. And I hope some of you are in some place where it's warmer than where I am in Ohio, where it's actually trying to be sunny today. So welcome, and I'm excited about having the opportunity to connect, even if it is just virtually. So the name of the class is the webinar is Setting the Course, and the reality is that we have to start from the very beginning. And if you've already started your project or your farm or homestead or whatever it is that you're doing, you may have to back up a minute with me and just try to think from the beginning, because we don't want to be like Christopher Columbus. You know, he didn't know where he was going when he left Spain. He didn't know where he was when he got there, and he didn't know where he'd been when he came home. And along the way, he did a lot of damage. And unfortunately, we live in a culture where we seem to do that an awful lot with many, many things. So can we go to the next slide? So the first thing that we have to ask ourselves if we're going to be successful is, what will I need to sacrifice? And we're going to talk a lot about not just what do I need to sacrifice, but you know, all kinds of things that maybe you haven't thought about. So if you have the ability to write down answers, that's great, because I know Larissa sent out a form that we like to use for setting the course. And then I also invite you to spend some time thinking about it and being honest, because you can be dishonest and that's not going to help. So being realistic about some of these things. So what will I need to sacrifice? So one of the things when I first started with Blue Rock Station and my goat herd was that I had to haul water. So we eventually created some rain barrels, and that really just changed my life. But now we have a buried cistern, and we have frost-free hydrants, and it feels like we're in seventh heaven. But again, I had to be willing to jump in and start, but I also had to be willing to say, this is the way it's going to be. Not that I'm going to all of a sudden have a buried tank and frost-free hydrants. And maybe at the time I didn't even realize that was possible. So what will I need to sacrifice? And try to list 2 or 3 things, because there are probably dozens of things that you can list. What excuses have I used for not setting or completing my goals in the past? So lots of you, a majority of you, said you don't have a business plan. So that's where you need to go back to. That's where you're setting your goals. That's where you're saying, where is it that I want to be? Where am I starting from? So for example, when we wanted to start Blue Rock Station, we had a little bit of a retreat, and we, meaning my husband and I, and our child, and at the time she was oh, I don't know, she might have been 2 or 3, but we still included her. We would draw pictures to create goals because we didn't have any words that she could write yet. And it was really important because it created the beginning of our business plan. And the first thing that we wrote about our mission, which is vital, because these are the things that you fall back on when you don't realize how well you're doing or how poorly you're doing. You're going to go back and look at these things. So our mission says we will reuse, repurpose, respect, and whatever. There are lots of re's. And then it says, and we're going to have fun. And that was super important. And then the third thing we wrote was, and we aren't going to work for anybody else. And there's the real pusher for really getting it right and figuring out how you're going to succeed. But the part that really guided us and has guided us every time we've needed to make changes to continue to make a living is the part about having fun. And when I wasn't having fun and I started announcing it, everybody looked up in horror because it's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We have to change things. So create a mission that you can live with, but is going to guide you and help you to fall back on it. If we can change slides to what 5 people can I call on for help and support. So again, this is important because who are the people who understand what you're trying to do, and who are the people who are going to be there when you need to call on them. And writing it down is important because I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm upset about something or I can't figure something out, I suddenly can't remember that I have people I can call to support. So if I have that written down, all of these things in writing, put that in writing in your head and it can guide you. Next slide, please. What special skills do I possess? So it's important to analyze those and ask other people, what do you think are my special skills? Because sometimes we're not able to be that honest at what we're really good at. So one of the things that I know I'm good at is writing about something, or I'm good at talking to people about something. So what are those things? And then the next slide is what activities could I do on my property or with my resources that would appeal to the public? So what kinds of things could I create? So for example, we have open house tour once a month. In the beginning, we had open house when it was warm. Practically every day, people could just show up. Invariably, we'd be getting ready to eat, and they'd show up and they'd want a tour. But so we had to try a lot of different things, and we looked at every single thing we had. So one of the things that we did early on was we bought some llamas because we wanted to do trekking, and we mainly did it because our granddaughter wanted to have llamas and show llamas in 4-H. And so we decided that one of the ways that we could make money was to gather the llama poo, because it's very balanced as far as nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium for plants. It's very balanced. And we dried it and we sold it in cute little packages. And the first year, well, for many years, we made enough from that to pay our entire feed bill for our livestock. So again, being creative, saying what activities do I have, what kinds of products do I have. Let's see, let's go on to the next slide. So one thing that I'm hoping you're going to do is to answer these questions on your sheet of paper or typing into the computer. We're going to go quickly because we have a lot of different things to discuss over the next 25 minutes or so. We don't have endless time, so I'm not going to go very slowly because you have the form that was sent out ahead of time. So what criticism will I face? This is big because one of the greatest things that I see in the work I do with women who are in agriculture is fear. We lack confidence because we have fear. So what kinds of things are going to come at me? And that's what we have to try to look ahead for. If we're going to plan to make a living, if we're going to create a business that's going to do well, we've got to understand what's the criticism that we're going to face. And being unconventional, and I will tell you that building a house out of garbage and then several buildings to go along with it is ever so slightly unconventional. And And so there were lots of criticisms from the government on down, but we've continued to be able to make a living. Next slide, please. I keep saying next slide, please, because we live in rural America where the broadband is really bad, and today there is wind, and so I'm not even able to get on to the site to be able to participate in the same way as all of you. So so Larissa is my trusty assistant here, changing the slide. Thanks, Larissa. So what motivates me? Well, money, if there isn't enough. I'm not terribly motivated by money otherwise, and that's not because I have tons of it. It's because it's not really a motivator. I'm much more motivated by people coming together, by people telling me I can't, getting angry. These are all great motivators as well. But then I need to utilize those motivators to do something positive instead of destructive, and that's pretty valuable. I know that when I wanted to build a house out of garbage, lots of people said, oh, you can't do that, and we sure have a mighty fine one. So you just have to figure out what motivates you. Next slide, please. So what will be the reward if I work towards my goals? And that is super important. That's the basis, besides that mission of what is it you're going to do. Remember I said we're going to have fun, we're going to reuse, repurpose, and we're not going to work for anybody else. The next step is for that business plan is what are those goals. So in the beginning, we had quite a number of goals. Of course, our goal all along was to at least break even. And frankly, it takes quite a while when you're starting any kind of business. And that's the number one reason that small business fail in this country, is that they don't have enough liquidity. They don't have enough money to sustain themselves during the period of time it takes to build the business, to build a brand, to build followers and loyal people who are going to purchase your products or your services. So for me, the reward for working for my goal is that I feel I have a rich life, and I enjoy being my own boss. In fact, I'm much better at being the boss than mostly I have been in my career, because I want to set the tone, I want to set the course. Next slide, please. So what's in it for me? That's the number one question we're all going to ask ourselves, because that's what we ask about a lot of things. People come at us and they want us to buy something, and we're like, what's in it for me? And if we're not asking that question, we should, because if I don't know what's in it for me, I'm going to flounder, and I'm not going to be able to be successful. And when I talk about success, I'm talking about making a living, being able to pay your bills, and being able to feel that you're doing the work you want to do and feeling good, feeling a sense of purpose about that. So what's in it for me? Well, my health, for one thing. I'm not a young woman anymore, so I like the idea that every day I have to have exercise by having a goat herd and pigs and chickens and visitors and interns and all the things that we do. And it's also, whether I like it or not, my legacy. And when we create these kinds of projects and businesses, we are creating a legacy, and we're showing our families and our children how you do it or how you don't do it. It also is a self-confidence booster, and it gave me the opportunity to have a conversation, and I'm not shy. My business partner wrote this, I'm shy. She is very shy. I'm not shy at all, but I also know that when I left my other career and I came to this one, I needed to have a story, and because I knew my other career, and this one I had to invent. Next slide, please. So in what way is my family going to benefit? So it might be that they have a healthier lifestyle, and or they eat healthier food, or they're in a better environment, or they learn more work ethic. So what is it that is going to benefit your family? Next slide, please. So in what way is my work going to benefit? So again, I talked about a sense of purpose, a sense of accomplishment. And when we don't get a sense of purpose or accomplishment from our work, We don't feel, it's really the sustenance of life. It's the stuff that keeps us going, that keeps us coming back and wanting us to, when we come to a problem, to cross that hurdle instead of turning around and saying, I can't do it. So what is it that's going to benefit you? What's going to benefit your family? And what is it that you're going to do, and what way is that going to benefit your work? Next slide, please. And then, of course, this is maybe the most important part after we figure everything else out, is my future. In what way will this benefit my future? And of course, we all want it to be a future of income that sustains us, but sustaining us is very different than saying, I'm going to get rich. And if you are in the business of agriculture thinking you're going to get rich, well, I hope you inherited everything you need to get there, because this career is it's for life. It is a life career. It is not, it's a lifestyle. It's not, it's not something you just do a couple of days a week, unless, again, you've inherited everything. And maybe even if you inherited everything, you know, everything has changed. And so you've got to have a whole new business plan, a whole new way of thinking. Today we have podcasts. Today we have webinars like yours. We tell stories in different ways. We have social media. So we have to be able to utilize those things in order to do well. And that all has to happen within a business plan, and also when you're trying to set the course. Next one, please. So my community, in what way does my work, does my business, does my lifestyle benefit my community? And this is an important question to answer, because especially in agriculture, we live in communities and we work in communities, and you know, people love gossip, they love to watch what's going on, and they know, you know, so we need to be able to make friends and work together, and this is a challenge sometimes. We definitely have had that challenge in our own business. But what we decided to do when our community that surrounds us is not one that really readily has understood, at least in the beginning, what we were trying to do. We've done things like mentoring and created internships and utilized the resources that we have with buildings and the ability to teach, to invite young people and to create community on a regular basis through these groups of young people that come and stay with us for 2 months or 3 months. We also have connected by sharing resources with other groups in other parts of the state and the country and the world. And so we've created virtual communities as well as local. We have events twice a year for friends and former interns that come for winter solstice, and in the summer we have something called Goat Stock to honor the interns and all the contributions they've made. Next slide, please. So who would be excited about what I want to accomplish with my business, whether you're already working towards that business or whether you're just thinking about jumping in? So it's important to understand who would be excited, because if you can't come up with anybody but yourself, you need to go and talk to some people you trust and ask them to help you answer this question. Next slide, please. So who would be frightened by what you want to accomplish? And this is a really valuable question to answer. Who are the people who would say, I don't want your business or your way of thinking, or you're all women trying to run a farm and drive tractors and all that, and women can't do that. You know, what is that? Who would be frightened? And again, try to think this through realistically. Is it maybe the government? Could it be the local sheriff? Could it be the neighbor next door? All kinds of reasons why people are frightened, usually based on things that aren't factual, but then how do we accommodate that? Next slide, please. So we need to evaluate other people who are going to be involved in our work. And that may seem kind of goofy, but it's not, because these are people who need to understand what we're trying to accomplish, whether it's a conventional farm or a retreat that's a farm. agritourism. What is it that you're wanting to do with the resources that you have? And these people are pretty important sometimes. And if they don't understand what you're trying to do, they aren't going to be as helpful. So you can see down the list what kinds of things, what kinds of people that you're thinking, that I'm thinking are important, and it's important to rate those people 1 to 5. Which ones are, you know, if you already have an accountant, are they doing a good job for you? Do they get what you're trying to do? Or do they think it's all pretty goofy and they're just going along for the ride? Also, an attorney, consultants. We often serve as consultants for people who are just trying to get started, and all of these kinds of things. Next slide, please. So also your neighbors. This is a big one. We often, sorry, a good background noise. Neighbors can be a real wonderful addition or a horrible challenge. And when you're getting ready to buy your land, or maybe you're transitioning to organic, that's sometimes a problem. If you have neighbors that are spraying and really don't understand or care about the fact that you need to be able to be organic, that might not be the place that you should start out. Sheriffs and deputies, especially in rural areas, this is a big challenge. Government officials and regulators. When we were first starting to build the house, we had to deal with the EPA because we have tires for walls. We had to deal with the idea of where's the compost toilet going to go and how's that going to work. Also, economic development, and this is a big deal if you're interested in agritourism, or maybe you just want to have an annual event. Local people can be very, very helpful unless they see you as some kind of a threat. So it's super important to know who's your friend and who should be your friend and how to make that happen. Next slide, please. So what can you do to improve the rating for those who may be a limiting factor in your business proposal? So by rating each one of those categories, and maybe you'll come up with some other categories, you'll be able to see where you stand. And then like the health department, that has been a big deal with us with the health department and the way that we treat sewage and compost and so forth. And so we needed to have a relationship with them. Or if you're going to sell meat or eggs or some other products from your farm or at a farmer's market, maybe it's a good thing to get to know those people that are going to be inspecting you. Next slide, please. So what are my greatest fears around this project? What are the risks? What are the obstacles? So fear is a huge thing. It's probably one of the byproducts of this culture. It is the byproduct of this culture, and fear holds us back. And so I think sometimes we have to hold our nose and squeeze our eyes shut and rely on the fact that we've gotten this far for some reason, and it wasn't just all luck. So what is it that my fears are? Like, for example, when I wanted to build the house that's made of garbage and I couldn't find a contractor, and my husband said to me one day, I hate to say this, but I think you're going to be the contractor, the builder, and I just burst out crying. And I started crying because I was afraid. I was afraid I didn't have it in me. But with the help of a lot of people, and certainly my husband giving me lots of encouragement, we did build the house, and it's been the mainstay of our living since that time. Next slide, please. Climate. What is the climate where you're going to be living? Now, there are some states, like in Ohio, where you can have all 4 seasons in the same day. But the reality is that there is a general climate here. So what's the length of the growing season? If you think you're going to grow bananas in the middle of Iowa, maybe you will, but it's going to take a whole different way of thinking than you're going to have these little rows of bananas. And so I'm being sort of facetious there, but we need to understand what is what's that climate? What's it capable of giving us, or in terms of good things and bad things. Next slide, please. Developments and improvements. So here's the thing, when we buy a property or when we're looking at property that we're going to rent or or going to share or whatever, we need to understand all of the possibilities of what exists on that land. And we then can understand what needs to be developed or improved. So for example, when we came here, there was one little, I can't even describe what it would be called, but it was a two-sided building with a tin roof that was rusted through, and the people who had clear-cut the land had built it with whatever they had, and they could just drive their truck or whatever machine they had through it and sit under there and work on it. And that was what was here. So we had to start from nothing, and I just want to say that starting from nothing sometimes is a lot harder than starting with something, because the something gives you a building or a project to edit, and that is a challenge if you don't have those things. So what kinds of roads and trails, what kinds of equipment is already there, what kinds of equipment do you have to bring there, what are you going to do with those things? If they have no purpose, can you sell them? Can you use them for art? Can you rent them to somebody else? So again, looking at every single piece of everything you have that has the potential, if you think about it, to earn a penny here, a nickel there, because every single penny fills the bucket. If you have a leak in your house and you put the bucket under there and it's maybe just one little drip, eventually all those drips fill the bucket. And that's what you're trying to do when you want to make a living, is to create ways from every single thing that you own as a resource until you figure out what it is you want to do and how it's going to work. So we used a lot of different ideas. We had open house tours. We sold llama poo. We held workshops to show people how to pound tires to make walls. We did bird watching. We've had goat college. We've done what they call forest bathing, where people would go for walks in the woods with the goats and sit there and meditate. We've written books. We've written articles. We provide consulting. People come, in the beginning, people would come and rent the building overnight. And one of the things that I found out right away, which I guess I already knew, is that I really didn't want to be the maid. And this wasn't such good news to my husband, because he didn't want to be the maid either. So eventually we just went to the point of the buildings that are used for our interns. And then also when we have special project events, so we have an Earthship, which is the name the architect gave the building that we live in. We have Earthship 101 twice a year, and people come and stay for the weekend. So we still use the buildings, and I still suppose I could say I'm the maid, but it doesn't feel like it now. So remember the thing of I want to be happy, I want to have fun, and so that's a lot more fun to me. Next slide, please. So what are potential hazards that exist on the property where you want to be or where you're going to be or where you are now? Farm equipment, so let's say you want to be at your tourist destination, but you've got all kinds of things that kids could run and climb on or and get hurt. What about storage? What about areas that would be off limits to visitors? So this might also be the case if you were wanting to have a farm store or a CSA, or you wanted to sell milk or dairy products from your farm. Next slide, please. Amounts of money and sources. So how long is it going to take for you to make a living from the business you're proposing? And again, that goes back to the basics of why you want to have a business plan. What's your mission? What are your goals? And each one of those goals should have some kind of dollar figure with it that shows how you're going to reach where you want to be. And the first thing you must do is to write down exactly how much money and how much you need to put aside in order to sustain yourself. So I might be bringing in a lot of money, but that doesn't mean that I'm keeping any of it. So in a given year, it costs us maybe 35% of our income just to teach our classes and hold our events. So that isn't money we get to keep. Although, if you have a good accountant or a good tax program and you're good at using it, you'll see that tax write-offs are one of the ways that you can make a living. And again, I'm not a tax accountant or an accountant. I'm not giving you legal advice, but I am saying that these are the realities for people who are in business. So again, how much money is it going to take? How many sources of money are you going to have in order to reach that goal? It's not a thing of just setting these wild limits on each of the goals. It's saying, I have to have this much, and this is where it's going to come from. So we've done things like consult with websites. We actually taught some website workshops when we first came here to live. Back in the day, I guess 15, 16 years ago, when websites were still fairly new and people could learn to use WordPress so they could create their own. And this was the other thing I should have mentioned earlier, I suppose, is that our business model is to teach people how to fish, not give them the fish. So everything that we do, every act that we have here, every event, every workshop is based on the idea that we are going to be teaching or creating something where you're going to learn how to do it for yourself, that we aren't going to just give it to you. And that's rewarding, but also it's a way to make a contribution to your living. Next slide, please. So you can start with a 5-year plan, and in that first 5-year plan, I say you're going to bleed, meaning you're not going to break even. If you do, that would be a miracle. The second year, you're probably not going to break even. But by your third year, and I hope everybody's not hanging up because they're they're like, oh my God, you got to be realistic. In small business, it takes time, and if you don't have cash reserves, then I guess the other solution is to create some kind of debt. And I'm not really into having debt. I feel like it's pure slavery, and so I like to talk about ways that we can avoid that. By the 4th year, you'll make a little bit of progress in making money, and then by the 5th year, you would hope to make a profit that equals the amount of work that you put into it. Unfortunately, when you work for yourself, that probably is never going to happen as far as all the hours that go into life and work. But again, this is a lifestyle. It is not just work. You're not just showing up 9 to 5. Next slide, please. How can I sustain myself until I can make a living with this business? All right, that is a super important question to answer. And if you don't know the answer, then it's important to go back and massage some of those things that are your goals and some of those things that are your cost of living, and see what you can do to change them. A lot of times we have things that we don't need. We have expenses that aren't necessary, and we have to make some sacrifices. Again, that's one of the questions early on, making sacrifices. So, next slide, please. What else can I do to make money? So here's a list of things that you can consider if you have any kind of skills. And again, we see people often that they've worked in an office, and so they have a lot of skills with computers and things like that. So what are those skills that could be used in what you want to do and how to make a living? And maybe it's a short-term thing, acting as a consultant if you're an IT person, or somebody who does graphics or whatever, or maybe to specialize in something that pertains to farming or the products that you're wanting to sell or the services you want to provide. I like to say if I was 10 years younger, I would go into the business of hoof trimming and doing sonograms for goats. I think there's a future in that. Next slide, please. So who are my allies? These are important questions to answer. And who are my adversaries? And we've touched on that a little bit already. So I know that I have many friends from what I like to say is my other life, but when I first came here, I really had only my husband as my ally, and that was very difficult. It's like I had walked away from the life that I had led to a whole new way of thinking and living. And so I had to make new friends, and I had to find people who were interested in the things that I was interested in. And I do remember many times making a list, because sometimes when you're discouraged, as I said earlier, it's hard to remember who your allies are and where are their phone numbers or their addresses to actually write a letter. Sometimes some of my old friends send me letters, actually. So who are my adversaries? Who are those people? And sometimes the people at the top of the list on this one are related to you. Family can be very supportive or very adversarial. They don't understand what you're trying to do, or they don't like the way you're taking your business. Maybe they were the farmer or the homesteader before, or they don't like the way you're raising your children. I mean, everybody's got an opinion. This is America. We're supposed to have opinions. And then here's the most important question after you've answered the mission and the goals and how you're going to make the money, is how persistent will I need to be to reach my goal? And I'd really like you to think about that, because persistence is a quality. It's a skill set. It's a skill set that says you don't give up. But then when do you give up? You know, knowing when to cut your losses, knowing when you've gone beyond the 50% to meet the goal. And I invite you to write down 3 sentences that describe the degree of persistence. What exactly will you need to do to make a living, to be able to pay the bills, and know that you have what you need in order to have a good life? And that's probably the most important part. So, Larissa, I think we can stop here, and we can maybe look at some questions and see if people have any questions. If they don't, we'll sing Kumbaya or something.
Thank you, Annie. And I forwarded it to that last slide. You have the womengrowohio.com. Just so folks can see it. And then, yes, I'll put it on the Q&A slide. So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate you taking the time to kind of go through your, I mean, there's so much personal expertise there. And I will open it up to questions. If folks have them, they can type them into that side, that chat bar on the left-hand side of your screen. And I will read the question aloud, and then Annie will be able to answer it. I do have a question actually about...
I just want to say, wait, before you do that, I want to say something about Women Grow Ohio and this last slide. So the Women Grow Ohio is a group that Carrie Starr, who is the Cherokee Valley bison rancher person, that's my business partner, and we started Women Grow Ohio because we realized that women who are in agriculture at a small scale, meaning they're not, planting thousands of acres of something, are virtually invisible in the agriculture industry. And so we've been creating podcasts and webinars, and we're getting ready to create a book called Buffalo Gals, and look at tell women's stories who've been in the farming industry and how they got to where they are and how they made a living. So just to say about that.
Excellent.
And if they're interested, you can go to womengrowohio.com and see what's happening.
Thank you, Annie. Actually, there's a quick question about where are you from in Ohio? And I'm not sure of your geography, to tell you the truth.
We're from heaven. That would be southeast Ohio. We say we're the Florida of Ohio, and so we live about 20 minutes south of Zanesville.
Excellent. Okay. So I have a question, actually. Wondering if you have any suggestions or recommendations for folks that are looking to either formulate, develop, or improve their business plan. Where do you go? What's do you have a one-stop shopping for, how to learn how to do that?
Yeah, I think, every state has a development department, but I think if you go to the Farm Service agency, I believe that's where it is. They have a really nice little simple business plan outline. And if somebody wants that, they can send me an email, and I can get that to them, because Carrie is the woman who works on that with me. She's the accounting person. And so we use something from them. I'm just trying to remember if the Farm Service Agency or Farm Service Credit. I think it's Farm Service Credit.
Okay.
That sounds better. They're all branches of the USDA, and every
Right.
state, of course, has their own. But farmservicecredit.gov, and it's a really nice little simple one. And if somebody needed some help, not necessarily in filling it out, but if they wanted me to just look at it briefly, I'd be happy to just give it a perusal if they're looking to put something together. I want to encourage people to do it. It's so important. It's a guide when things aren't going well, and it's a guide when things are going well to help you measure where you've come from and where you want to be. It's so important. It doesn't have to be complicated or long or drawn out. Just something very simple that shows the mission, what is it you're going to do, and then what are the steps you're going to do that, and then how are you going to pay your bills.
Excellent. Yeah, and I'll try to, if we can get that together, I'll try to include it in the follow-up email if we can find a link to that.
Okay. Okay.
So we have a question about, do you have more guidance as to do when to call it quits? The person writes in, I tend to be very stubborn and don't know when that transitions into foolhardy.
Yeah, well, I think that's a big issue in farming. It happens with livestock when we look at our livestock and we say, emotionally we're attached to our land or our livestock or our purpose, and our vanity is definitely involved in that. But so I'll just use livestock for an example. Sometimes, if you have livestock, you've got dead stock. You've got bad prices in the marketplace, whatever that is. And if you've given it 100%, if you have these guidelines to fall back on that say, what is your mission and what are your goals, what are your steps to getting there? And you look at that and you say, look, I did all that and I'm not there. Then that's the time to pull out the allies and the accounting people and your friends and have a come to Jesus meeting and say, look, it's not working. What else could I do? And we've done this a couple of times in our life together, where we said we've done everything we can. We've reached our goals. We aren't making enough money to feel like, we've got a little tiny bit of a cushion. And so we invited people from our other life. We invited former interns, and we would have these weekend meetings, and we'd say, this is what we think. And it's not easy to do. I mean, you've got to put your soul out there. Like when I said, I don't want to be the maid when we're talking about renting out buildings for people to stay in. And they gave us such great suggestions. We followed those suggestions. We were able to take our resources and shift them slightly, and we started doing a lot better financially. So I think you have to have some way to measure if you've really been that persistent. You're saying stubborn, but really it's persistence and saying, I can do it. Then if the data shows you that you're not doing it, then that's when you call in the help. It's not that easy. You got to do it, though. Otherwise, everything falls apart. Your critters die, or they waste away. You lose your land. You lose your home. You got to do it.
So, adding on to that, we have a couple questions about that last slide where you said 3 sentences to describe the degree of persistence needed to reach a goal. And folks were kind of looking for some more description on what that means and maybe some examples.
Okay. So if I'm going to reach my goal, first of all, I got to know what the goal is. So they should write down what are those goals. And then I need to say, like in the beginning, we talked about what am I willing to sacrifice or whatever. And once I've done all those things, then how persistent am I going to have to be to reach those goals? And so, for example, I'm going to have to get up every day at 6 o'clock and milk those cows and clean the equipment, and then I'm going to have to every day go back at 5 o'clock and do the same thing again. Every day that it's snowing and it's a blizzard, I'm going to have to go out and, take care of the chickens and haul water. And I'm going to have to do it sometimes 4 or 5 times a day when it's sub-zero weather. I'm going to have to consistently be marketing what I do, and I'm going to have to do it even though I don't want to. I'm going to have to take a class on social marketing, and I'm going to have to learn the internet, and I'm going to have to learn about Facebook. And if I'm not willing to do those things, then I cannot succeed. You want some more examples?
Right. So it's kind of thinking through what are those big things that you kind of have to accept and then work to overcome. If you kind of say yes to that, then it might not work out. No, that's good.
In my life, I would say, Larissa, and to all of you that are listening, that I am the richest woman in the world. And the reason that I believe that is that I have another thing that I use, which we could talk about in another webinar, called the economics of happiness. And it's a template that I can lay down on each aspect of my life: transportation, community, my spiritual practices, my family, my work. And I can look at if I'm really meeting the needs that I have within those areas. And yes, there are places where I need to and must do better. But for the most part, I can say that I'm rich because in that economics of happiness template, I am achieving more than 50%. It's the very worst around community. That's been a big one that we've had to work on, trying to pull people together because we don't have the community we would like right next door. So again, it's really about saying, what is it that I truly value, and measuring all those things, and not just how much money I have in the bank. Now, if you have debt or you owe taxes, the government doesn't care. You've got to do that. But then what else do you have? You've got fantastic trees, you've got a pond, you've got a barn. What's the value of that in your life? These are really important things. What's the value of those relationships you have with your animals or your family or your friends or your high school buddies? Again, these are all things that are valuable, but they have needed an amount of persistence where you have kept those relationships going, you've kept those animals going, you've kept that barn painted. It all comes back to everything that you do needs to give you some sense of accomplishment. Yeah, I don't like it when it's sub-zero weather and I've got to go because my goat's in labor, and I would much rather stay in bed. But that persistence, that sense of I've got to do this because this is my job, this is my bottom line, and this is my promise that I have made to my family, my community, and my livestock. And if you don't have that work ethic in you, you're not going to succeed unless you have $1 billion and you're going to pay other people to do it.
Mm-hmm. Wise words. So we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I have one that's question is, how did you and your business partner get together? Which also leads to maybe some tips or suggestions for identifying someone that might be a good business partner.
Well, my business partner is my husband. So I have 2 different things, that the Women Grow Ohio, which has morphed into really to a business. That is a friend, and we have been friends for quite a while and just really enjoy each other's company, and we decided that it would be super fun to try to organize other women and see what we could figure out. And so that's how that all started, but we just work super well together. And then I'm really, really fortunate to have my partner in life, 38 years now, who, he's just a brilliant person. He's good at figures and computers and all that kind of stuff, all the things I'm not good at, and I'm good at marketing and bologna sausage and writing and planning and things like that. So I've been fortunate to find people who really fit well with my personality, and I fit well with their personality. And we also have a degree of honesty And there's a persistence in that being the important part of the relationship. So we try to get things right. We try to plan things. We try to fix things when they're not okay. And so, I think it's a lot of it's luck. But if you know that's on your list of goals, then that person will appear.
So one last question for now. I know there's a couple other questions that folks had specific, or more personally for you, Annie, that I will forward on to you, and you can respond to them individually. But this question is, how often do you recommend revisiting or revising your farm's business plan?
Okay. Well, just let me back up for 1 second and say that every week, at least once, we have a meeting where we sit down, and if we have interns here, they're a part of this meeting, and we talk about what's happening for the week and where everybody's going to be and what we need to do. And we also have a radio program, so we have to pull things together for that. And then once a month, we have a scheduled meeting that's on the calendar for the year that we sit down and we look at all the financials, and we go back and look at our goals and where we were a year ago and 2 years ago and 3 years ago to see, are we on target or are we behind? What's the reason we're behind? What's the reason we're ahead? So, this is capitalism. And even though we have a business model that is very rooted in involving the community and paying forward a lot, we give and support a lot of other important causes. And we're not rich, we're just good at trying to figure out how this all works. But we also want to know, where are we in our finances, so that if things are not going well, let's say a workshop is not doing well, then we can say, well, and by well I mean there aren't enough attendees, so let's figure out over time, do we just set that aside for a while and develop some other ones, or do we try to change that around somehow? So we're trying to stay on top of how we're making a living. And we're very aware of how we're making a living. And then once a year, we go away for 2 days, away from the farm and out from under the middle of our work. And we spend 2 days turning everything we do upside down and wrong side out and sideways. And we say, is this what we want to do next year? Is this fun? Is it still fun? How much money is it making? How much money isn't it making, but we still want to do it because it's important to other people? What is that? And then we create our next, we have a 10-year business plan, but we're always massaging that next year. Our goal is to create enough material, intellectual material, that at some point we would be able to turn the farm and all the things that happen here over to some of our former interns. And then we would just live here until we couldn't live here anymore. So it's super important to have this open relationship and this awareness of what's going on, because putting your head under the sand and not knowing what's happening with your finances or your numbers as far as attendance or product sales or service sales, it doesn't work. So you got to be persistent in knowing what you have and what you don't have. There's that word again.
Persistent. Yeah, it's a good word to go out to to end on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's some really great advice, Annie. We've had a lot of people that have written in to say thank you and to ask for more information. So perhaps we'll have some kind of follow up in the future. I do have a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to share with everyone that's still on before we sign off. As a reminder,
Can I ask a question? Wait one
sure.
second. Can I ask a question? If people are still on the call, maybe they could answer this question, is if they would find it useful, and not to say FACT is going to do this, but would they find it useful and would they participate if there was another webinar that was more like Ask the Expert, where they could actually ask questions and maybe they would write in questions. I'm not sure how it would work, but I'm just...
On this topic, in terms of kind of like business planning and...
Yeah, setting the course.
Setting the course. Yeah, we're getting a lot of thumbs up, which are the I guess, emoticons that float. If you could see the screen, Annie, that's what you'd see, little thumbs up and some hands clapping.
Okay, I like that. All right.
So there is some interest. It's good to know. Yes, and that's
Okay.
something that you can also know on that survey that I have. If you have feedback about this webinar or topics for the future that you'd like to see, we're always looking for kind of the next step. So please take that survey. I also will send a link out to it in the follow-up email. Like I said, there will be a follow-up email with the links to the slides and the recordings and whatever other resources we can compile in the next day or so. There are several other webinars coming up this spring already scheduled. Next week, we have one with Drew Peters and Homer Walden from Sunnyside Farm in Pennsylvania, and they're going to be with us to discuss their new design for mobile pig shelters. This is based on a presentation that they gave earlier this winter at the PASA Sustainable Agriculture Conference, so you don't want to miss it. And then also, I wanted to mention that Annie will be back in a couple months, mid-May, to lead a webinar on how to establish and effectively run an internship program on your farm. So hopefully you'll, please join us for one or all or as many as you'd like these webinars that are coming up. So a sincere thank you to you, Annie, for your really fantastic presentation and taking the time to answer questions and sticking around. It's been a real honor and pleasure to have you, and I look forward to having you back with us in a couple months. And I'd like to thank all of our audience members for your attention and interest, and I certainly hope that you'll be able to join us on a future webinar. Annie, do you have any parting thoughts before I close?
No, I just hope everybody will leave the workshop and go and write down their answers and then think about it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for a wonderful afternoon. And for those of you who caught my typo, it's grazing cover crops on April 9th, obviously. Thank you for letting me know. I hope that everyone will join us again in the future. And thank you very much for being here today. Have a great afternoon. Goodbye.